A prison with a very insane system, which frustrates many of its inmates, can even make someone cannibalize just to survive. This film opens with the scene of a chef who is checking the ingredients and monitoring the process of making food in his kitchen so that the quality is maintained, where the food will be served to all prison inmates. Scene moved where there was seen a man woke up in a prison cell together with an old man. Without greetings at all, the old man suddenly mentioned the 48th floor. He also said that starting from today, they will eat leftovers from upstairs. The higher the floor, the smaller the number, where the highest floor is the 0th floor. The man who had just been placed in the prison immediately looked at the center of the room, where there was a very deep hole. The hole served as a path for the food lift that came from the 0th floor. After hearing a brief explanation from the old man, the man introduced himself and said that his name was Goring. The old man replied by saying his name, Trimagasi. Each floor in this prison is occupied by only 2 prisoners, which is where they will be together for 1 month. Goring, who was curious, asks Trimagasi about how the hole works. Trimagasi replied that the higher the floor, the better. He also said that the 48th floor was a pretty good floor, because it was in the middle. Goring, which was still in a daze, was surprised by the dropping of a large rock through the hole. The chunks, called platforms, served to deliver food to the residents from the top floor to the very bottom, with a duration of once a day. Just arriving on the 48th floor, the food on the platform looked completely unfit for consumption, which meant it would get worse if it reached any lower floors. Trimagasi, who was starving, immediately ate the food, but Goring was still hesitant to eat it. Trimagasi tells Goring to quickly eat his food, because each floor is only given 2 minutes before the platform descends to the next floor. Goring, who was very hungry, only took an apple, which would be stored to eat a few hours later. Shortly after the food lift descended to the next floor, Goring suddenly felt that the room was suddenly hot. He asked Trimagasi why the room feels hot, and Trimagasi also said if the occupants try to hoard food, then the room temperature will automatically change to be very hot or cold. Hearing this, Goring immediately threw the apples he had stored in the hole, so that the room temperature returned to normal. The next scene is shown when Goring conducts an interview session with one of the prison workers, where the prison is called the Vertical Self-Management Center. In the conversation, Goring was invited to bring one item that would accompany him while he was in prison. Of the many choices he can carry, Goring chose a book called Don Quixote for him to read. Goring was in prison not because he had committed a crime, but because he deliberately went to this prison for 6 months to get an accredited diploma. Trimagasi also said that he went to prison for accidentally throwing a TV from his apartment and hitting a cyclist to death. Goring and Trimagasi spent their days together and started getting close to each other, until one night there were gas smells in the prison. This indicates that they will soon be unconscious, and at that point, the prison floor and floor mates will be changed randomly. If no one died on the floor, the cell mates would remain the same. The next day, Goring woke up tied to his bed, and it turned out that the culprit was none other than Trimagasi, his cellmate. Trimagasi's goal of binding his cellmate was none other than to survive for the next month in cell level 171, because of course, living on the floor with such a large number would surely not be getting food. Trimagasi said that he would not be able to live for a month without eating anything. So, armed with the knife he brought when he went to prison, Trimagasi wanted to eat Goring parts slowly. Fortunately, before Trimagasi's intention was realized, Goring was rescued by a person named Miharu, in which Miharu happened to be exploring the floor after floor of the prison's cells by climbing a platform, looking for her son. Miharu immediately hit Trimagasi in the back and stabbed his neck with a knife. After releasing Goring's ties, Miharu invited Goring to take revenge on Trimagasi. Blindly, Goring then stabbed Trimagasi repeatedly until he died tragically. Besides saving Goring from Trimagasi, Miharu also took care of him before continuing the search for her son. A month passed, the prisoners were again transferred to their cells, and this time, Goring occupied a cell on the 33rd floor with a Magiri, who turned out to be a former employee of the Vertical Self-Management Center who interviewed him first. Goring asked Magiri how many floors were there in this prison. Imagiri said that during the 25 years she had worked there, she knew that the total number of floors was around 200 floors. Logically, the amount of food available would not be sufficient to meet the needs of around 400 people, but Imagiri said the food served could suffice for all prisoners if a system of solidarity was applied. Imagiri tries to form a food-sharing mindset by preparing 2 roughly equal portions for the residents on the floor below. However, the appeal was never heard, until finally Goring forced the prisoners in his lower cell with a threat. Imagiri also talked about her experience when working as an employee at the Vertical Self-Management Center, who did not know the conditions inside. She only knew that the lowest floor of the vertical prison building was at level 250. Until finally, Imagiri entered the rehabilitation center out of frustration at being diagnosed with cancer. The newly awakened Goring finds that Imagiri, who has returned to being his cellmate, is lifeless. Even though she was sent to prison voluntarily, on the next move, Imagiri was unable to face the reality that she was in cell 202. With his deteriorating body condition accompanied by the departure of his cellmate, Goring's condition was getting worse. The situation of the cells in the deepest part continues to suppress him. The shadow of Trimagasi and Imagiri continues to haunt him, while inhabiting the cell at level 202. Goring hallucinates too often, so he can't hold himself anymore to eat Imagiri's meat. The following month, Goring woke up again from his sleep, and was placed on the 6th floor, which is the highest floor, while he was in the prison. On the 6th floor, Goring is accompanied by a man named Bahara, who is a religious man, who is always optimistic about getting out of the prison. Bahara also chose to bring a rope to be able to climb to the top floor. This month is the last month for Goring to be in prison, and being on the 6th floor means that Goring can calmly wait for the day of his freedom without starving. Amazingly, Goring didn't want to be that kind of person. He asked Bahara's help to go down to the bottom floor. Goring invited Bahara to climb the platform so that he could distribute food fairly on each floor. Initially Bahara objected to doing this, but after being persuaded by Goring, Bahara finally agreed. They climbed onto the platform carrying iron from the bed to be used as weapons. Initially, everything went according to plan, until on a floor they met a man named Brambang. He advised Goring and Bahara to bring a message when they returned to the 0 floor. The message had to be represented by a meal that looked delicious and appetizing. The food they choose must arrive at floor 0 intact and not touched at all. With such food conditions, a message will be conveyed to the guards on the 0 floor. Hopefully with this message, the prison manager will become aware and change the crazy system. After hearing Brambang's words, they chose Pun Nakata to be escorted back to the 0 floor. Pun Nakata, who was untouched and returned to the kitchen in one piece, was proof that solidarity had occurred. The inmates of the vertical prison were able to organize themselves from greediness, and that it means the prison's mission has been accomplished. So prison officials should release the prisoners after that. At least, that's Goring and Bahara's hope. Many things happened when they passed the floors, until one floor they saw Maharu was about to be killed by a man. Goring and Bahara also tried to help, so that Bahara had to get a wound on his stomach, and Goring was beaten black and blue. With this condition full of wounds, Goring and Bahara continued their journey. The 250th floor, which is thought to be Goring, is the lowest floor, proved to be false. Which means that there are still many floors below, that it was unknown how many of them. The deeper the floor, the worse the conditions for the prisoners. Fortunately, the food they had been guarding until then was still good and untouched. In the end, the food lift stopped on the 333rd floor. They were confused why the floor stopped even though there were no prisoners there. Apparently, there was a child hiding under the bed, and Goring assumed that this child was the child Mahara had been looking for all this time. When Goring and Bahara approached the child, suddenly the food lift came down leaving them, and seeing the child starve, they inevitably had to give Punna Kota, which they had kept for the child to eat. When Goring is unconscious on the 333rd floor, he has hallucinations about the spirits of Trimagasi, Imagiri, Maharu, and Bahara, which turns out that Bahara has died due to blood loss. In his hallucination, Trimagasi said that the child was the real message that had to be delivered to the 0 floor. Hearing that, Goring also invited the child to climb the platform. But because Trimagasi said the message does not require an introduction to get to the top, Goring goes down and let the child go up alone to the 0th floor. Hopefully the child can be a message that they all do not deserve to be treated like that because their humanity is still there in prison. This film is a description of the real-life conditions by explaining the existence of social disparities between upper-class society and lower-class society. The condition of the government that does not know the real condition of society, and the existence of parties who try to oppose the system to make it better. For those of you who are not disgusted, this film is a must for you to watch, because it has a very deep moral message. Okay, that's the synopsis of the film this time. Hopefully this film can be the right film recommendation for all of you to watch. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe or follow this channel, so you can get recommendations for other exciting films.